The Battle of Ligny was a ferocious head-to-head clash during which the French army, commanded by Napoleon Bonaparte, drove back the Prussian army led by Marshal Blucher. It was fought on the second day of Napoleon's invasion into Belgium. His goal was to split up and knock out the closest two enemy armies of the European Seventh Coalition. Each of the nations in the alliance were assembling their armies in preparation for their own planned invasion of France, to commence in July of 1815. The Allied leaders once again sought to remove Napoleon from power. Meanwhile, 5 miles northwest, the Duke of Wellington, who had collected half of his Anglo-Allied army at the crossroads of Quatre Bras, had tenaciously foiled Marshal Ney, who commanded the left wing of the French army, which was unsuccessful in its attempt to capture the strategic location. On the morning of the 17th, Napoleon made his first major blunder in the campaign. He failed to initiate a rapid pursuit of the badly beaten Prussians, allowing them time to reorganize and conduct an orderly retreat. Napoleon's second, and arguably just as disastrous mistake, was diverting 1/3 of his army, commanded by Marshal Grouchy, to follow up, at a distance, behind the retiring Prussians, seen moving north and east. As a result, the French main army, commanded by Napoleon, was weakened, being deprived of 2 entire infantry corps, and 2 cavalry corps, given to Grouchy. Finally, by early afternoon, Napoleon spurred into swift action, and redirected his troops, to join Marshal Ney, at Quatre Bras. He then launched a close and vigorous chase, on the heels of the fighting retreat of the Duke of Wellington's rearguard, which protected the Anglo-Allied army as it retreated north, to avoid being cut off, and then destroyed by the superior French forces. Napoleon's ultimate plan was to capture Brussels, the Belgian capital. He believed that capturing the city would persuade the Seventh Coalition leaders to initiate peace negotiations, especially if the populations of the Low Countries, in the Flanders region, rose up to support such a French triumph. By late evening, Wellington's army had skillfully evaded the pursuing French, with Napoleon seen leading the chase. The Duke halted his army's fighting retreat, and took up battle positions along an extensive ridge, just 2 miles south of the village of Waterloo. In front of them, the pursuing French advance guard took no further action, as the rest of their army gradually came up, and prepared to camp for the night. Amid this frantic drama, since the afternoon and going into the night, an immense downpour of torrential rains completely saturated the region, along with all the soldiers and horses who were helplessly exposed in the open, miserably trudging along waterlogged roads, and trying to find crude shelters in mud-filled fields, while almost every man and beast in both armies were practically half-starved. The army's supply wagons could not keep up with the rapidly unfolding events and troop movements. The rain-soaked veterans among the 140,000 troops, struggling to get some sleep, silently predicted an epic and grim battle would be fought the next day, and some, expecting the worst, wrote their final farewell letters to loved ones. In contrast, Napoleon was eager for the battle. "Now I have them, these English," he smugly declared. By dawn of June the 18th, the misery of incessant rains had abated. The clouds and light drizzle heralded better weather was ahead for the day. Napoleon was more than pleased to see that Wellington's army had remained in place, instead of trying to escape overnight. His own army was still stretched out at this time, and not ready for an early start to the battle. For this reason, and the fact that the muddy ground was unsuitable for fighting in, Napoleon was content to delay starting the battle. He had breakfast with his generals, at the inn of La Caillou, where he characteristically boasted of an impending great victory, and being in Brussels by nightfall. Napoleon scoffed at Wellington's army, and even chastised the cautionary comments that his generals were daring to present. By mid-morning, Napoleon reviewed his troops, in a memorable ride upon his white horse, once they had taken up their final battle positions. The French soldiers were overjoyed when they saw their leader, and cheered out loud, "Long live the Emperor." At the same time, their regimental bands played stirring military tunes. Napoleon, the great military mind of his time, could not conceive, in his omnipotence at that moment, that anything could go wrong. Napoleon's battle plan commenced at 11:30 in the morning, with a furious diversionary attack against Wellington's right flank, upon the defended chateau grounds of Fougommon, which was led by his brother, Jérôme, the commander of an elite French infantry division. The dramatic assault eventually stalled, but it succeeded in drawing much of Wellington's infantry brigade reserves to reinforce the threatened area by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was at this moment, Napoleon was startled to learn that the Prussian army, which was previously believed to have been neutralized and retreating miles away, was in fact heading towards the battlefield. Napoleon now realized he had walked into a trap. Though, in the previous 24 hours, the armies of Wellington and Blucher were in full retreat, heading north on separate parallel routes, both commanders and their general staffs had plotted a risky gambit. According to plan, Wellington's army was to stand its ground and defensively pin Napoleon's army in battle, while most of the Prussian army, almost 10 miles away, would turn west and join the action, crashing into Napoleon's eastern flank. The ultimate ambitious aim being to squeeze Napoleon's army in vice and utterly destroy it once and for all. Napoleon, still hopeful for victory, remained committed to continue the battle against Wellington. Throughout the day, Napoleon and Marshal Ney directed massive troop assaults of French infantry and then cavalry across Wellington's battle position. All the while, the French artillery was continuously bombarding the Allied army's emaciated front line, where casualties and battlefield desertions accumulated in high totals. Most of Wellington's reserves were plugged into the front lines by early evening. His situation became desperate, and the French commanders knew it. In the meantime, Napoleon directed many of his own reserves to face off against the Prussians closing in on his eastern flank. By evening, halfway into the battle, Marshal Blucher's leading brigades of the Prussian 4th Corps began attacking Count Lobau's French 6th Corps that had been sent to block them. The Prussians steadily pushed back their adversaries, pressing on for over a mile towards the French center. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the battle in this sector then raged around the village of Plancenoit. Here, dead bodies from both sides quickly piled up, amid grim and no quarter close combat street fighting. Napoleon was distracted by the threat, now worsening behind his right flank. Prussian cannonballs dropped amid his central battle positions. He had to act quickly and decisively. He still had most of his Imperial Guard infantry available. A French victory was at hand against Wellington, when at around 6:30 in the evening, the German-held, formidable farmhouse position of Lycent, in front of the Allied army's center, was finally captured by the French. Shortly thereafter, French infantry, supported by cavalry and artillery, began bleeding Wellington's center dry, which seemed moments away from completely breaking wide open. Marshal Ney saw it, and sent messages to Napoleon, begging for more troops at that critical moment. Ney's desperate request for a few infantry to finish off Wellington was outrightly refused by Napoleon. He exclaimed, exasperated, "What? Where does he think I can find them?" At the very moment, the Prussians were arriving in greater numbers and making gains in the fight, raging in and around the village of Plancenoit. Napoleon committed his Young Guard division into that action to stave off the collapse of his right flank. By 7 o'clock, Napoleon had managed to temporarily stump the Prussian assaults by throwing at them just 2 of his old Guard infantry battalions. The stunning shock attack launched by these veteran French guardsmen pushed back the humbled Prussians a mile beyond the contested village. More than satisfied, Napoleon then returned his focus back to defeating Wellington. But in the previous 30 minutes of breathing space, while the French had failed to exploit their advantage in the center of the battlefield, Wellington personally rode up and down across his front line, supervising the stabilization of his weary troops and redeploying his last reserves to effectively bolster his weakened sectors. At 7:30 in the evening, as the sun began to set, Napoleon personally led forward the remaining reserves of his Imperial Guard infantry in a final, all-or-nothing attack to destroy Wellington's center. The last slim chance for the French to be victorious had now arrived. Napoleon deployed his old guard in tactical and strategical reserve positions amid the center and rear of his army. He then left Marshal Ney to lead forward his 4 middle guard infantry regiments against Wellington's center. Napoleon then returned to his forward headquarters position, next to the inn of La Belle Alliance, to survey the attack of the middle guard veterans, which was accompanied by a battery of horse artillery of the guard. With the bravest of the brave, Marshal Ney at their head, the veteran Imperial Guards steadily marched up the muddy hill of Mont Saint-Jean in square formations. Dead Frenchmen lay all around them. The wounded ones cheered them on. Cannon fire smashed into their ranks. But they carried on, as if unstoppable. French soldiers across the front line were in high spirits. Napoleon's messengers were racing among their ranks, telling them that Marshal Grouchy and his troops had just arrived on the battlefield, and were attacking the Prussians. But Napoleon had deceived his troops. Feeling no guilt, he sent out messengers to race across the French front line, to excitedly spread the false rumor of Marshal Grouchy just joining the battle. In reality, Grouchy was just starting his own action, 8 miles away, attacking the Prussian rearguard, consisting of the 3rd Corps, commanded by General Thielmann, which was defending bridges over the river Diehl, in and around the town of Wavre. Napoleon, observing his middle guard attack, advancing against Wellington, was suddenly taken aback. His attack plan he desired, was supposed to be one compact mass of his guard battalions, striking Wellington's weak center. But he saw the attack, altered in mid-stride. Instead, the battalions had spread themselves out, to attack in a line, across Wellington's right flank, which lay in wait, behind the summit of the Mont Saint-Jean plateau. The final assault of the French Imperial Guard struck the Anglo-Allied line as separated entities, with none supporting each other. There was some initial success. Parts of the defensive line did momentarily fall back. But, within 15 minutes of very tenacious fighting by both sides, all the French guardsmen were overwhelmed by the Allied defenders. Napoleon observed the calamity, as he saw the remains of Wellington's army actually launch a general attack across the valley. Wellington's advance, alongside the Prussians overwhelming the French right flank at the same time, led to the complete disintegration of Napoleon's army. Wellington and Blucher pushed their armies forward to complete their pincer attack strategy and crush the helpless French army. Abandoning their cannons, muskets, and wagons, the mass of French fugitives were chased by Allied and Prussian cavalry as they headed southwards along the main road, back to France. Many, who were expecting Marshal Grouchy to save the battle, realized the deception and, most ran for their lives. Napoleon realized the catastrophic reality of that moment, and said, "All is lost. It is time for us to retire." Among the last French defenders, still offering a brave show of resistance, were several battalion squares of the fearsome Old Guard, who were conducting slow, but impressive, fighting retreats. They blasted out deadly volleys, to keep away Allied attackers who unwisely dared to charge at them. At times they even fired at their own countrymen, who were mostly berserk fugitives, mindlessly rushing upon the Old Guard, to seek their protection. After failing to rally the army, Napoleon took refuge in one of the squares of the Old Guard, together with some of his senior generals. Some infuriated Prussians, seeking to settle long-standing vendettas against their former conquerors, continued to slaughter unarmed French soldiers, even the wounded. Many of these avengers may have been seeking out Napoleon himself, just to take pleasure in lynching him on the spot. At around 9:30 p.m., perhaps only just 400 or 500 yards away, from where the defiant Imperial Guards were protecting Napoleon's life, the Duke of Wellington met with Marshal Blucher, amid the ongoing horrors around them. In the gloomy dusk, both commanders congratulated each other on their historic, tremendous victory, while a Prussian military band played a hymn in their honor. Only the sheer determination and sacrifices of the soldiers and officers, in both Allied armies, and the Allied commanders' devoted commitments in their risky battle plan, secured their final narrow victory. At this time, as darkness fell, Napoleon finally exited the battle in haste. The emperor became a fugitive, now rushing towards the French border, escorted by a small entourage, consisting of several of his most senior generals, and a dozen of his Imperial Guard lancers, and chasseurs. His household staff, still with the imperial carriages, were left alone, to face their own fate and survival. Napoleon's group confronted a major challenge, at the nearby town of Genappe. A scene of utter chaos was unfolding, where mobs of retreating French soldiers were crammed together, trying to bypass a mass of abandoned wagons, and then cross the narrow main bridge spanning the Diehl River. Vengeful Prussians were at their heels, cutting down their victims with ease. Napoleon and his escort avoided the congestion by finding a crossing to the west of Genappe, and thereafter being unimpeded, resumed their flight, pressing forward to the crossroads of Quatre Bras, where Wellington was victorious against the French 2 days earlier. For the moment, Napoleon was safe. The Allied armies, and his own defeated fleeing army, were far behind, as was the horrific Waterloo battlefield, where 10,000 soldiers lay dead, alongside many thousands more, who were severely injured.